by wearing it, and it starts up good conversations. So, but, oh, and the VA is, it's emotional, it's like a second family. Just going there if you have appointments, you can't help but run into other vets and just start talking about different things. It's great. Keep it up. I wish I would listen more to Phil about the bike.
Thank you, Bob. I knew that Bob loved Phil because he would always send him a Christmas card and a Valentine's card. That was really, really sweet. I've met a lot of Phil.
We read them for months.
And Bob, you were in a tank in Vietnam, right?
No, I was a photographer.
Oh, photographer, that's right.
Yeah, I actually, photography interested me in high school, and then I, draft was coming up, but I enlisted to become a photographer, and the Army held their card up, and I was a photographer. I was in Vietnam a year and a half. I came out, I had the GI Bill, so I went to a private photography school in California. And that eventually became my whole career. So
Bob has the best cared for manicured house in Fort Atkinson.
Well, I can't say that about my apartment. Hi, I'm Nicole Godhelp, and I met Phil probably when I first moved to Madison. I graduated from Beloit College and moved to hang out for a year in Madison. But instead I went to grad school, and then I became a politician, and I got very involved with the Bassett Neighborhood Association back in 1977 when I moved to Broome Street. So I know Paul Soglin was here but left, and Paul Riley spoke. But and for those people who did not know Phil back then, when I think of Paul Soglin's administration, and Jim Rowan, are you still here?
Yep.
Oh, hi, Jim. So Jim Rowan, Phil Hall, Barbara Livingston were the people who were Paul's aides that I knew, and who really created the Madison that I knew, that wanted to get me involved with politics. And Phil also was a constituent because I represented Francis Street Court. I don't know if you knew that. But anyway, I loved those row houses, and I hated when they had to come down, but anyway, I just wanted to say that Phil was a presence. I just remember him being tenacious, working on the Beltline, working on MATC, these things. He was just gung-ho and really at it. And it just, when I think of Paul, I think of you, Jim, I think of Phil, and I think of Barbara. And I think of all these people like Paul Riley, who probably came out of military service, got a GI Bill, and went to school on the GI Bill, and then became civil servants to make the city a beautiful place, and worked with all of us, and listened to 22-year-olds saying we need to do this in my neighborhood. And they really advocated and made sure we had representation from young people to make the city a better place. So that's I haven't seen Phil on his bike with his beard. I haven't seen Phil in a long time, but I'm really glad to hear Carl and all you ladies took care of him, because that is just beautiful. Yeah.
One of the reasons why Phil was a cyclist is basically, I think he was staving off his dementia and getting blood flow to his brain, and that's why he was so vigorous, cycling. But here, Gerald.
Thank you, Carl. My name is Gerald Thomas, and I don't have a story to tell. There are many stories. I fit in Phil's era of working with the MATC issue, when Paul Phil and others were trying to keep the MATC campus downtown. So Phil and I met in the mid-70s, I think around 74. And at the time, there were 7 members on the board of directors for MATC. The newspapers dubbed me 6-to-1 Thomas, because as we tried to keep the board from making what we felt was a terrible mistake to move out of downtown, the board members would vote. There was a site every week, it seemed like, a new site where to put the campus every week. So the board would vote for the site, and typically it was 6 votes to go to XYZ, whatever the site was, and 1 vote that said no. And I kept saying no, no, no. People wonder why the action of the board was held up, or could be held up, when most of the board members voted to adopt a particular site. And I would vote no. Well, it wasn't my no vote that, of course, that kept them from building. It was Phil. It was Phil. I was the inside man, and we were all men at that time on the MATC board of directors. I was the inside man, and Phil was the outside man. Phil and I would caucus, it seems like moment after moment, day after day, night and day. Caucus to try to figure out how to keep this mistake from occurring. So that went on, as I said, I think 5 years. MATC would come up with a site, they'd put it before the board, they'd vote 6 to adopt the site, I'd vote no, and then Phil would figure out a way to make it not happen. And he did it by coming up with some way to keep tying the board in one court battle after another. I learned a lot about law. I'm a psychologist, but I learned a lot about law during that time when Phil would come to me and say, well, we're going to do this and this and this, and that'll keep him from building, and he did. He did. And that went on, I think, about 5 years. And then finally we got to a point in the 5 years where it was apparent that the board was not going to build downtown. I said to Phil, in that it seems that we have not convinced other people of our genius to build downtown. So I think we've got to do something else. And then Phil had a comment that I'll always remember, but I will not repeat here. A comment about a description of that board. And then Phil left my life, and he came back here to Fort Atkinson. I didn't know anything about Fort Atkinson. And so Phil disappeared from my life to Fort Atkinson. It was an obsession. We were obsessed. It was unhealthy. Literally, it was unhealthy. And so Phil, had to come back here to Fort Atkinson. And then I worked with the board on a compromise committee. And what was trying to be done in 5 years. We, in about 30 days, came to an agreement to build at Truex, even though Phil would be telling me that, oh, those planes flying over your head, you have a reason for not building at Truex. So I never met such a brilliant strategist. Brilliant. I learned a lot about the law. I learned a lot about strategies. He was a wonderful guy. My brother, Phil Ball, and I will always appreciate him.
Savannah, come on up.
I don't have anything succinct to say because I was not planning on speaking, but just hearing everyone else talk about Phil was so different for me. I did not meet Phil. Phil just has always existed in my life. Funkle Phil and Funkle Paul, my two funkles, who are also helped raise me and my brother. I spent a lot of time with Phil, both here and at his apartment, eating pot roast, and I don't know what else we were doing, watching TV. And Phil, yeah, he spent a lot of time just hanging out with me, and I think I took that for granted as a kid. He was just around. He would do art projects with me. He always had lots of time for me. He did try to torture my brother and I by constantly trying to teach us math. Constantly.
Not now, Phil, not now.
Be like, it's the weekend, I don't want to. I'm terrible at math. I don't think that my mom is that great at math either, arguably. But I was always a grade, I did pretty well in school, but I was always a grade below everyone else. All my friends were a grade above me in math. And the only time I was ever smarter than anyone else in math classes in 6th grade because Phil had decided to teach me the Pythagorean theorem in like 4th grade. And I knew it. And then after that, it was all downhill, and poor Phil could not help me. And he did also he spent hours trying to teach me how to measure the width of the river. Using, I think, the Pythagorean theorem. I could not tell you how that was gonna work. But it's just, yeah, it's been very interesting. I know, I grew up hearing stories about Phil and a lot about Madison and organizing, but hearing what he meant to everyone else when it was so different for me, and I am now in a slightly more radical phase of my existence, and I feel kind of sad that I'm not getting to talk to Phil and get, his insight and just hear stories and learn about organizing. It would be so useful now. And I think when I was younger, I appreciated the stories and always loved hearing them, but also when you're, 7, 8, 9, you might just want to play a game sometimes. But Phil always made time for me. He always brought me gifts. Paul notably reminded me that one year he brought me bags and bags of arguably junk, but it was the most exciting birthday. You'd open a cargo bag and there'd be another bag inside of it, and inside each pocket was some weird thing that he probably got at a thrift store or had stored somewhere in a basement, but he brought it, just bags of stuff. It was the most exciting thing as a 10-year-old to get bags and bags of presents, even if they were junk. So anyways, nothing succinct, but I loved Phil, and I really loved hearing what he meant to all of you, because he was just sort of a staple in my life. He was a part of our family. He literally came to, he grew up with my mom and my aunts, and so he was at all of our family gatherings. He was always invited, and so I just sort of took him for granted, and I didn't really know all of, what he was to all of the rest of you. So I'm really grateful to hear all of your stories as well.
stuff from Phil in there.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
You want to read?
Yeah.
I'm not. You can say it.
So a couple people wrote us things. Is this on now?
Yes.
One of them was Michael Fellner, the notorious Michael Fellner, some of you know. It's pretty long, but it's mostly worth reading. For Phil, my dear friend and fellow tenant of the Boulevard of Broken Dreams, which is what our nickname for Francis Court was. It is with great regret and sorrow that Charlie and I will not be in person at the tribute to Phil at Café Carpe. Ever since I saw the video of Phil's beautiful and simple natural burial in the woods outside Madison, tales about Phil have been popping up in my dreams and aging radar. But as Phil would no doubt agree, don't let the facts get in the way of a good story. I met Phil when he was running the tenant union, and I had started a local consumers union. He took me under his wing and introduced me to people I needed to know, taught me about local direct action organizing, and introduced me to his fabled sugar-based mind-altering diet of oranges, bananas, and coffee cake. Little did I know that it was an antidote for PTSD and depression. In late years, I added pasta and other carbs to this self-medication. Phil was also the first person in Midland to invite me to a real meal, and I had the good fortune of dining at his West Washington apartment, where I met the incomparable and lovely Mimi Wells. Incomparable because she was and probably is one of the best cooks I have known and could out-eat both of us. I don't think I ever had the chance to cook for Mimi and Phil, but I did get to serve them pet food as part of a takeover color shoot in 1974. The picture is here. We called the Beggar's Banquet. They both were elegantly dressed. Phil wore his bowler hat and a bow tie, and Mimi a long set of pearls and a black dress. Years later, Phil was my date at the annual newspaper guild Page 1 ball. I don't remember what he wore, but I wore a navy blue dress, high heels, and a wig. Eddie Elson provided the tickets to the ball, and we went to punk the guild and all the politicians who were there to honor Peter Pescick, who was partly responsible for putting Madison's Kaleidoscope editor and Takeover's founder, Mark Hoffs, in jail for refusing to testify before a grand jury about the New Year's game. Mark spent 6 months in jail, and we thought it unconscionable that a newspaper union would honor someone who jailed the first reporter to be jailed in America since the 1600s. I'll get off the soapbox, but in my bombast and recollections of Phil, I am reminded how Phil was not really an ideologically driven person, but a profound core sense of right and wrong. He was friends with crazy lefties like me, politicians of many stripes and bents, a master of the intrigue of City Hall, way more than his boss, and could be friends with real estate tycoons and landlords like Fred Mose, as well as late-night strung-out denizens of coffee shops and the White Castle. He also lived in my former home, Francis Court, the infamous Boulevard of Broken Dreams, where he roomed number 7 with Uncle Carl and Paul Nichols. Many a tale could be told about what is now the center court of the Cole Center, but I will leave that to Kitty, Bill, Paul, Pat, the Mick, David Wernicke, and others who might be at the Café Carpe in person. Phil and Carl barely escaped alive the Boulevard of Broken Dreams. Ironically, when a homeless person set fire to the adjoining building, setting the tenement row homes in a blaze. Another near miss. I have another near miss story coming up. I guess Phil had a lot of near misses. Another near miss was on a motorcycle ride on a country road near Mount Horeb. Phil loved to roar in his BMW up to the old cheese factory I was inhabiting at the time and lure me into joining him on a ride on the back windy, hilly roads west of Madison. I never wore a helmet, and I don't remember him wearing one either. One day we came around a blind corner, hit a patch of sand, and the next thing I remember is the slow motion 360 tumble we took onto the long grass in the ditch alongside of the road. We both brushed off the burrs and gravel, got on the bike, and made it home. It took me decades to get back on a motorcycle. Phil thought nothing of it and was unfazed. In recalling a few of the Phil near-death escapades, Paul reminded me that Phil was memorialized by Takeover's master scribe, Dr. Morris Edelson, in 1977. So in some ways, Phil cheated death for another 25 years and went on to affect change and keep on trucking until his demons got the best of him. I would call that a life well lived. Bravo, my friend. The article with his fake obituary is over there.
Yeah.
He was eaten by bears. Last and most importantly, I want to thank Kitty, Carolyn, Satchel, Savannah, and Paul for giving him a second home. Café Carpe was a perfect clubhouse for Phil, even if he annoyed the owners and regulars. Thank you for taking care of him and supplying him with all the fruit and sweets to keep him going. But a special gold award goes to Carl Armstrong, who is Phil's roommate on the Boulevard of Broken Dreams and who holed up with him the last couple of years in Fort. Thank you. What a match. What an unbelievable human being and friend, which I think we can all do. I have another one to read about a near-death experience, but does somebody else want to say something before? You mind if I pull my note?
It's not in the mic.
This is from Charlotte Bliss, some of you know, another Francis Corders. My first memory of Phil Ball was in the front of the Mifflin Street Food Co-op in the mid-70s. I worked upstairs from the co-op at the Mifflin Community Health Center, a community organization for which Phil was instrumental in securing the original funds. Phil was sitting in the driver's seat of his immense and, by today's standard, great unecological blue convertible, top down. He was eating an apple as we chatted. When he finished the apple, he just tossed the core into the back seat. Having been raised in a proper Midwestern home with staid decorum, I was shocked. I'd never before seen anyone litter their own car, let alone compostable material. Perhaps Phil saw the astonished look on my face and said he'd take care of it later. I don't recall. In hindsight, his action may have appeared to be a pragmatic disregard for conventional rules, when it really was an alternative personal solution to waste collection. It was just private littering, something you did and took care of, whenever. I ran into Phil on the Union Terrace one summer day, and he asked me, and I asked why he wasn't sailing. Do you want to go, he asked. Sure, I said, not noticing the weather. We drove to the boat, docked on Lake Mendota, put up sails and set out, ignoring the darkening skies, or that all the other boats were headed back to shore. No, instead, we set out and took off across the lake faster than I'd ever sailed before, not mindful that a wind in this direction meant it would require a lot of challenging coming out in order to return. The winds grew stronger, so we took down the mainsail and just used the jib. I remember holding onto a rope very tightly, and Phil said I could just tie it down to the boat. No, I was holding onto it for dear life and would not let go, regardless of how much it was cutting into my palms. We tacked port and starboard, coming about with the boat angled dangerously into the water. It seemed like each time we came about, I fell ungracefully over the centerboard, again and again, holding onto a rope tightly whenever I could. I didn't know we would make it back intact, or if we would make it back. I don't know how long it took to get back to shore, or even if it rained, but we were quite wet from the waves. We didn't talk much. I just wanted to get home and add this sailing adventure to a mental list of other sailing adventures best forgotten. And I wanted to heal. My hands were so raw I couldn't drive for a week, and the back of my thighs looked like I'd been badly beaten. People at work wondered what had happened. I never went sailing with Phil again. Thank goodness. Instead, in Madison, we go to a custard, talk about chaos theory, or later just hang out at the Carpe. Whatever the topic, he brought curiosity, intelligence, humor, and a glint of the absurd. It's that mixture, that element of surprise that I will miss. Charlotte. I guess this is an important for. But thank you to all friends, loved ones, and caregivers for being there and helping guide him these last few years. Your help was a blessing, and may his memory be a blessing too. So, do we have others? Surely we have others. Anybody from McQuantico? Anybody with Scrabble stories? Oh, well,
Scrabble, yes. Everybody remember Phil with his Scrabble?
Gordon does.
Well, Phil would play a word, and he had this dictionary, I think it was an Oxford, the hugest dictionary I've ever seen. And of course, that word would be in there. It was tough playing it. but
Okay.
Carl?
I just-
I've got two people lined up.
I played a lot of stuff with Phil.
Sure. I just wanted to make a last comment that Phil feared that no one would remember him. And I think we proved him wrong.
I'm from Monaco. Just getting my voice.
Can't hear you now, you young little lover.
Sis boom ah, rah rah rah. This isn't about Phil, this is about his brother Bob. My mother knew Phil's mother. They were great friends. They belonged to the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, the United Nations Association, other peace and justice organizations. Phil's mother's name was Teresa Ball, but everybody called her T-Ball. And she was about this tall. She was a kindergartner teacher of kindergartners. And Phil's brother Bob was about the same age, but very unlike Phil. Not gregarious, not the kind of person that Phil was, joking and figuring out strategy. Bob was a math genius, very quiet, and he was chosen by the draft board to serve. And this was not something Bob could have done, serve in Vietnam. And everybody available in the peace movement in Waukesha County was doing what they could to keep Bob out of the draft. At one point, two men in black suits came to T-Ball in her kindergarten class to interrogate her about her son's true feelings of being anti-war and unable to serve. That may have had something to do with Phil's later activity, in spite of the fact that he served in the Navy himself. Bob never did serve. He got a deferment, a conscientious objector's deferment. But it made a big impression on all of us in the peace movement.
Hi. I'm really impressed with all the stories I've heard this afternoon, and I didn't know half of the things that Phil got up to. I'm only speaking from personal experience. So I came here in 1986, and I soon discovered the Carpe, and I loved it because it had warm beer. And the only thing I didn't like about it was, because I came here to escape the English, you know, and there was one Englishman used to frequent this place very often, Michael at the back there, and it took a little while, but we become the best of friends. But Mike and I used to play Scrabble here, midweek, and I think you might have won one game, Mike, maybe two. But anyway, I always pretty good at. So Phil said to me one day, he says, I hear you're good at Scrabble, Gordon. I said, oh, I'm okay, Phil. I says, would you like to play? And he says, oh yeah, I'll play, Gordon. I said, well, let's set it up. He says, no, could you come tomorrow night at 7:15 and we'll play our game? I thought, wow, that's kind of formal. So anyway, the next night I comes down and I gets in here at 7:15. There's Phil sitting at the table with a dictionary that must have been, I don't know, 4 inches deep, 12 inches long and 9 inches wide. And I thought, oh my God, I'm used to a little Scrabble dictionary paperback edition, a couple of 100 pages. But not only that, he had a timer. You know those timers you use when you play chess? You bang on the clock. I thought, oh my God, what have I got myself into here? So anyway, Phil explains his rules to me. But they were Scrabble rules, but nobody ever plays the rules to the letter. He says, if you challenge any of my words, and we look up in this dictionary, every word under the sun would be in this dictionary, he says, you miss your turn. So I said, okay, that's fair enough. I can play that way. So we get started, and I got off to a good start. In fact, I was even in the lead. I'm thinking, oh, he's a Yank, he'll beat him easy, But then, as the scores were getting a bit separated, he started playing these 2-letter words, popping them in everywhere. And I thought, there's no way that's a word. But here's Phil, Midwestern values, he wouldn't cheat like that. So I refused to challenge, So anyway, the game went on, and sure enough, Phil won the game. So Kitty asked earlier about any other near-death experiences. Well, for me, that was near suicide. Because I've never been beaten like this in Scrabble. So I went home, and I remembered all these 2-letter words he used. I'm looking them up. No such word. What a cheat he was. But it was good fun anyway, and I really enjoyed Phil's company over the years. We had some good discussions, and it was a great knowing him. So thank you everybody, and thank you for the Café, Carpe, a wonderful place. It's been the years I've been here, and great hosts, including Bill. But my daughter grew up with Savannah, so I'll get a special thing for Sav. So anyway, thank you very much everybody.